that begs a question.
Mhm.
Once you sat down to do
Yeah.
post-processing, how long did it take you to do all of that, all of those steps and pulling it all together?
This one, I think it took about an hour and a half on this particular one, just
Whoa,
because of the masking. Yeah, I think that's right.
that's amazing.
Oh, thanks,
Yeah,
man.
that was a particular complex subject you had there for masking.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
so
definitely was.
the lesson is for those newcomers who are gonna try it, do
Mhm.
it on an overcast day with no shadows.
Mhm.
Make sure there's only one runner in the frame.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my god. That's incredible. No,
Well,
it's
I
interesting. Go ahead.
yeah, I had a series where I do have single runners, a little further down the block than this, but I thought this one was more visually engaging. But they're all equally compelling. But yeah, uh, our marine layer in the early summer is the best friend you can have for this kind of photography. It's like living in a softbox for 6 hours a morning. You're just
Whoa.
never worry about light all
Yeah.
that much. It never changes.
Yeah, the thing I love about this image is the guy who looks like he's walking while
Yes,
everybody else
he's my
around him is
favorite too.
running.
Yeah.
I it's just
I would character.
it looking at everything in that image, my eye went right
Yeah,
to him
yeah,
because he was a contrast to everybody else. Everybody else is
yeah.
moving and he's just like walking through life.
The funny
Fascinating
thing,
image.
and there's a very practical reason why that is. I don't. It makes him look like a slacker, um, relative to the other runners. There is a caveat, though. One of the interesting things about the Rock and Roll Marathon is that they run it in two lanes. So the lane that's closest to me, in this particular instance, that's the marathon lane. The lane that's farthest away is the half marathon lane. So the less dedicated runners, the kind of mosiers, they tend to be in that farther away lane. So it also gives you an interesting variation in velocity in this particular instance. But
Yeah,
yeah, he
that's a
sticks
perfect
out to
way
me
to
too.
describe it. That's
Yeah,
exactly what drew me to the guy in the center of your composited image because
yeah.
it looks like he's just obliviously walking and everyone else is running like madmen. Fantastic
Well, at least,
stuff.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, you're right. He from in those three images, he goes from about a third, maybe, maybe a fifth into the frame, and he makes about halfway by the third image. I
Whoa.
lost one runner. You can see her leg sticking out, the one that's closest to me. But yeah, that's interesting.
Amazing. Mike, over to you.
Yeah, Steve, I wanted to ask, as black and white photographers, we've kind of got an eye for what makes a good black and white a photograph, texture and that type of thing, and shadow and light. But composites, what makes a good composite image when you're going out? What do you see that says, "Oh, that'd be a great composite opportunity"?
Yeah, it's this one. This one was spontaneous. So that your criteria is really all right. Let's say it concisely. Once you start opening the door to composites, because and you know this as well as I do, is that there is a basic competence that you have to demonstrate just in terms of viability or uh, it's a sleight of hand. It's a magic trick,
Mhm.
right? So at the end of the day, now this one obviously these are the same subjects multiple times. You can accomplish a similar thing if you just run a multiple exposure in your camera, but you don't get quite as much um, control over it. It
Yeah.
just kind of comes out as it comes out. Um, but the great thing about compositing as a discipline or as a skill that you add, or a quiver that you, an arrow that you add to your quiver, um, your sky's the limit in terms of your imagination. So yeah, we were joking about throwing a banana into the middle of a thing, but it's not that far from distant. And it exists in the same context as the emergence of AI generation, which can accomplish similar things, but it's all baked in. Whereas this is something that you can take, but I mean, time lapsing is essentially compositing. You know, it's like if I take three exposures to three different times of the day, I can trifurcate that image so that I've got, you know, high, noon, sun in the center panel, morning and night. Really, the sky's the limit. All you have to do is make sure that it makes sense in some
Mhm.
way, or that you're making a point. But it's really in that spectrum where we go from pure fabrication to documentation. You know, as a, you know, I took a picture of an event. This is as accurate as I can do. This moves you somewhere in the middle. So you say, oh yeah, well, you know, we had this, and then we had this that happened in the same space at a different time. So you move that in, or um, wouldn't it be interesting if we had this added to this? So it's almost like Matisse, right? You know, you establish the relationships between cutouts, and you kind of throw them up, and the way they interact forms a different shape. So, you know, your imagination kind of runs wild, but it can be as subtle or as gross as you want it to be, just as long as it works, right?
A follow-up question on just what you talked about there. Do you find that liberating? Because I know as photographers, we tend to live by rules. The rules of third, the horizon's got to be level, et cetera, et cetera. All of a sudden, we're saying, don't worry about any of that.
Yeah.
You know, do whatever looks good. You know, and like, oh, your mind starts going wild. Then,
There's an old joke. There's an old joke in the theater about people learning their lines is that you there's a methodology where you learn your lines so that you can forget them. For me, photography's been that way because, yeah, Mike, you're a million percent right. We get into this, and then, you know, somebody hits you with the rule of thirds, and they hit you with the golden ratio, and they hit you with, you know, oh, okay, and then it's composing on the fourths, and, you know, dynamic range, you know, a million things, and we learn all those rules. And I think for myself, and for, you know, for others that I interact with, there comes a point where you hit the point where you can selectively not adhere, that you recognize that they're a baseline, and you're like, okay, I recognize that, but if I don't compose this on the third, or if, you know, if I have the horizon line not a third of the way up or a third of the way down, or a billion other little things, or, you know, if my subject is dead center, because it has to be, because it's the only way that the image works. As long as you understand the rule that you're breaking, and you're
Mhm.
doing it for a good reason, um, because those rules are guidelines. You know, they're
Yep.
okay. There's good physiological reasons why they exist, um, but in context, you know, maybe not so much. You know, maybe in this particular instance, but your words speak, right? If you keep making that as a mistake because you're acting out of ignorance, then your portfolio looks bad.
Mhm.
Um, you know, but if you have a good dominant command of the rules, and then because something demands it, you're not so into orthodoxy that you adhere to them in spite of everything, and cause the image to suffer.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah,
One follow-up real quick. I thought I heard something. I wanna make sure I get it right.
yeah.
You just said a moment ago, the subject has to be in the center? Did I hear that correctly? For
No, no,
compositing?
it's well, no. Everybody encourages you not to put your subject dead center. Was all
Yeah,
I was saying. So, and no, they don't. They absolutely don't have to be in the center. They can be wherever. But
okay.
there's always that one thing where you come across a subject and you're not supposed to put in the center. They're looking to the left, so you should move them to the right slightly so that they have something to look at. But sometimes there's a twist in the body. There's a dimension to it. No matter where I put this thing, it's not going to work unless I put it right in the middle. And you're making a mistake. And you know that some nitpicker is going to come along and say, oh, yeah, shame you threw that in the middle. But if you know it's the right thing for the image, sometimes you just have to say, what the hell, and put the thing dead center.
Mhm.
And, reflection shots are a lot like that, or, things where are creating mirror images of things. So you put the line right down the middle, or you put it off to the side. It's like it's whatever works, but it's like any other language, right? I mean, you start with C Dick Run, compose on the thirds, watch your leading lines, all that good stuff. That's C Dick Run. And then the more fluent you become in the language, then you start creating your own words in a way. As long
Well
as it
said.
conveys the idea, then that's the journey of language. That's how words happen.
So, to kind of paraphrase then, compositing is a challenge of continuity,
Hmm.
of competency, and then finally clarity. If you put those 3 C's together, that's sort of a wonderful frame, if you will, for the idea of compositing. You have to develop the competency. You start with rules, but then as you get better or more skilled, rules aren't. Rules are
Yeah,
suggestions. It's
yeah,
what do you want to create artistically?
yeah.
Fair?
And best of all, David, that's alliterative as well. I am so proud of you, man. Three
He's been thinking
C's.
about that the whole
Hey,
meeting long.
oh,
Three C's.
spontaneous alliteration. What can I say? Steve, this has been illuminating to say the least. One final question. For someone who's totally new to compositing, but who you have lured onto the rocks as the siren of compositing, for someone who wants to try it out, which software apps would you suggest they consider? And why do you choose Photoshop?
Well, I would recommend Photoshop for two reasons. Well, the answer to the second part of your question first. I use Photoshop by attrition. I've been using it since 2003. Um, so like all men of a certain age, I didn't pick up any other tools. So I probably don't have the breadth and scope of current software uh, to help with that. Um, I I like it because the great thing about Photoshop in and of itself is that you get Lightroom without having to buy Lightroom. The Adobe Camera Raw, that's the first thing my raw images hit. It's become enormously powerful. And at the end of the day, the the Photoshop Adobe Camera Raw combo does everything I need it to do. I know there are other tools, um, any one of which will probably do the job. At the end of the day, like any software, your proficiency in it is the thing that governs your ability to use any other tool. I mean, I can hand you a socket wrench, but if you don't know how to use it, it's a club. So, whatever software you use, just learn the capabilities because most photo editors have this sort of thing in mind, along with a million other things that you may or may not ever use. So that's why I do it.
I've got a follow-up question for you, Steve. Could you just
Yeah,
kind
Mike.
of, again, for somebody's new to compositing, just kind of outline, the basic steps again, summarize them,
Okay.
and then what are the most important things to remember when compositing that you want to really pay attention to when you're doing it?
Okay. The the key things for compositing are get as get as clean an image as you can. Um, low ISO is indicated. Usually, if you can, keep the noise at a reasonable level. Because noise is a factor too. So if you have noise that doesn't agree with itself, you get some interesting artifacts that way. So keep your camera settings as consistent as you can across the images that you're using. The weirder they get, the more problems you end up with. Align them with some objective point in each one of them. They should have something in common for this type of compositing. As we discussed before, pano shots, that needs overlap, which does need to match, but the entire thing doesn't have to match across the scope. Fortunately, most software will do that for you. You can tell it to auto align something. It'll find the most logical thing and line up your layers, and then you can crop and arrange as needed. When you are eliminating elements from one layer and allowing elements from other layers through, direction of the light is absolutely vital. Nothing will spoil the effect more than you've got subject one that's sitting on the left side of the frame with sun coming from the right, or if you're doing it in a studio context, the light came from the right, and then your subject on the right is lit on the complete opposite side. It's just they're mostly things that would be easy to forget, but it's the small details that enable success or failure on that. Make sure that your shadows are correctly oriented, and preserve your shadows in general. People tend to, one of the ways you can fail is if you get myopic about the subject without its effect on the environment, which is just as important, if not more so. So the depth of the shadow, where they are, or the contours of the light, good contrast helps me a lot. Makes things pop, as opposed to avoid flatness, because then it's the difference between something that's rich and has depth as opposed to something that looks like you cut something out of a newspaper and slapped it on a piece of paper next to each other. So I find getting your shadows as deep as you can, getting your highlights as high as you can, tends to help with that. And at the end of the day, whatever you composite, compositing takes the static image and gives you the possibility for a more nuanced message or a more overt message. It amplifies what you can say with a single image and augments it. It just opens up a whole new pantheon of things for you to play with without ever robbing you of the joy of the simple still image. It's all there.
Well said. Steve, thank you so much for spending time with us today. This has been informative. There's a lot of great info here, and the way you talk about it. And Mike, thank you also for your input, because having experience doing this, I think it really helped bring it to life. Appreciate both of you guys taking the time. Thank you so much for being a part of How Did They Do That? With that, folks.
Thank you, David.
Our pleasure. With that, folks, remember, Black and White Bistro, the espresso of black and white photography. Now get out there, think about compositing, and get some terrific black and white photographs. See you all next time.